us to actually participate in the process. And if you think that we would engage someone to help us make a presentation, look at the formula critically as against other communities, and see where there might be stress points that are reasonable in light of the challenges the other communities face in the state.
Yeah, well, there will certainly be an opportunity for everyone to come and present in front of, I'm assuming, what will be a huge committee undertaking for a new funding formula. You know, what I would say as someone who represents, you know, as you put it, a non-sympathetic community in the school funding formula, you know, I don't know how much the majority of the finance office and the reps at least see it that way. You know, it's my job to advocate for our town and our schools. And, you know, I go up there and advocate for us to get what we need and what we deserve every single day. So I don't see that as much as an issue as, you know, when they weight the formula with things that we don't have, that is obviously a lot different when they decide to use, you know, school lunches, or they decided to use property, you know, tax rates or whatever. You know, we don't do so well there, but if we decided to use other metrics and we did better, you know, I think that that is what should happen regardless of what community we are. And so I don't see that as a problem, but I do see, you know, saying these things where we would do a lot better if we were even able to anticipate a lot of the things that the superintendent spoke about. You can manage your money wiser every year, and then over time that would yield benefits, right? If you knew what was coming, or, you know, maybe the state provided extra funds at the last minute if you had a surprise that was coming that you had to pay for because of, you know, our general laws or whatsoever. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to do that. I think, you know, identifying like the top 3 things that you would want from a funding formula and advocating for those over and over again, you know, would be my recommendation. And, you know, I would want you to tell them to me so I could advocate for them over and over again. You know, really focusing on these important things that would really make a difference rather than a laundry list, you know, of things would be my recommendation.
Right. And frankly, you know, we're not trying to be more needy than most of the communities. We're not going to win that, and nor should we. We may, however, have targeted populations that are needy, which do drive revenue disproportionately. And I'm not saying that drives the whole formula, but maybe it's not as represented as it should be. I don't know the answers to that. I just know that we have a whole new group of people here. And if we're going to take a look at that, I was wondering the best way we could do it to anticipate the need for equity in the state. And also just even if the response is, this is where we should be, at least we know it. I just don't know it from where I sit. And you know, I didn't know if the school committee has any intention to participate, and how we could help with a fair, reasonable look at this.
Yeah, well,
I would love to jump in.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chairman.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to just briefly say one of the things that we'd like to do with our school committee agendas going forward anyway is have a standing agenda item, you know, legislative or regulatory updates, and then create a space so that we can do more of that work collaboratively if we want to come up with a resolution, if we want to examine the funding formula early on in the calendar year to bring suggestions to our legislators. I would think that that would be a good forum in which to do that, and we want to make sure that we are properly aligned with however any legislation is moving along. And so I think that there'd be an opportunity to do that in a workshop of some sort, a joint workshop, and I'd love to create the space to do that. Representative Caldwell had a response, and Dr. Quinn had his hand raised as well.
Just quickly, I would say that although it is about equity, it's also that every student in East Greenwich deserves to have an exceptional education, just like every other student in the state. And I think of it more, actually, Carolyn Mark, you know, had a good phrase for it, which is it's not about each community getting an equal or a bigger piece of the pie. It's about making the pie as a whole bigger. It's about all of us investing more money in education in the state, and then everyone gets more money. and gets what they need. So I'm always an advocate of that. I'm sure Senator Valverde is as well. I don't want to speak for her, but, always advocating for just more money in the budget for our public schools is really the end goal, I think.
And this was moving forward in the Senate last year, and things obviously got derailed by COVID. But the funding formula, task force or special commission, I forget which one it was making some recommendations for expanding that pie, as Rep. Caldwell said, amongst other things. And so we will definitely be taking that up in this next legislative session.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Dr. Quinn, you had your hand raised earlier.
I did. Just to Councilman Donegan's point about us being not a sympathetic community, I agree 100%, and I'm sure Representative Caldwell and Senator Valverde, you're well aware of this. But the funding formula, well, the formula part of the aid is if you look at the metrics, it's based on the community's ability to support public education through property taxes is pretty much what drives the formula aid, formula part of the aid. But then we have these separate, special categories for high needs special ed and those items. It would be nice if we could kind of consolidate that into a, kind of a more comprehensive formula that would, not necessarily, again, equity is important, but we recognize that we do incur these significant expenses at times. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Quinn. I'd like to suggest that we might not want to get too much in the weeds here, but there's so much fodder for discussion and food for thought that we really should contemplate sooner rather than later, holding, whether it's a joint workshop, getting some sort of a document, really understanding what the timeline is so that we on the school committee side, along with the town council, can come up with whether it's our top 3 proposals or whatever that is, and sort of work together to present something comprehensive for both of you to sell for us. So thank you for all of that. Are there any other comments? We have not yet heard from any town councilors on Mrs. Meyer's presentation. Mrs. Korenthal, do you have? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. Before I had some questions specifically about the budget, but before I say that, I just wanted to say that I've gotten to know Miss Myers over the past couple of years. My children did not attend East Greenwich Public Schools, and I know very well Allison Powell, who is a very good friend of mine, and I've begun to know quite a few other people on the school committee. And Eugene I've spoken to everybody actually. And while I don't agree with every decision that they make, and I probably never will, I do not question their commitment to the kids or the dedication to do what's best for East Greenwich. And I say that because I tried to limit myself on Facebook because there's a lot of garbage on there. And I suggest that usually specifically addressed to teachers, and I am a teacher as well, a special needs teacher, and it is really not helpful. And I suggest to them, as one who's attended many school committees over the past 3 years, I suggest to those people that they run for something like I did when I was unhappy. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But all right, now specifically to the budget. On page 4, I don't know if you want to go back to some of the presentation, but I had some.
Mrs. Korenthal, I just want to double check. I wonder if we should just see if there's anything else for Senator Valverde and Rep. Caldwell first then, and then maybe we can go back, or we can just, I don't know if we want to keep them here on the panel. Just, I don't see anything else. So I don't see any further, and we will talk further. So just again, Rep. Caldwell and Senator Valverde, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the relationship and the work that you're doing, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mrs. Korenthal.
No
Apologize,
problem.
please.
No problem. I don't know if you want to go back to showing us some of the presentation. Maybe that might be helpful because that's where my questions are.
I do have the slide in front of me, Mrs. Corenthal, if that
Yeah.
helps, whatever works best for you.
You might as well put up, I have it as page 4. It says review of the FY21 budget. I hope I'm going in order of the page.
It is page 4. It is page.
Okay. Okay. You talked a little bit about salary. I don't know if this is exactly where that is, but there was no salary statements in some of the budget, within the budget, and I'm just curious as to, it's not on this page, I don't think now.
No, it's a chart. It's a chart. Next page, next slide, please. The salaries are on this page.
Yeah, why are there no encumbered, and when the salaries go across, why is that number left blank? Is that a particular reason?
I mean, that's a fair question. I don't know, Mrs. Baker, if you want to answer it, but we could have encumbered it on there, absolutely, based on what is the projected piece.
Okay.
So I wanted to do a little bit more of a deeper dive and not put a number out there that wasn't completely accurate. That's why the number is left open on there. My preliminary analysis of everything is that it will be within budget, but I want to go into a deeper dive just to make sure that that is correct.
Sure. Regarding COVID expenses, if that's on page 5, I think.
It is, but that's a good question, because if you notice in that purchase property services where there's a negative 111,000, which is probably why you're asking that question, that is has been expensed out. That is the cleaning and disinfecting crew that is being contemplated there.
Okay, so along that same line, that seems a little high to me, $150,000 for custodians. That seems a little high. I just wonder, is that the best way to have gotten at cleaning up the buildings, or I don't know, maybe I'm unrealistic, but it did seem a little high to me.
So that was, we approved, the school committee approved a contract with a service to come in that come every day. And we have staff in all of the buildings that are continually cleaning and disinfecting, consistent with the CDC guidelines and the RIDO guidelines. So, the restrooms, the classrooms, cleaning surfaces all day long as students are in the building.
And okay, along that same line, is it unrealistic, or is it realistic to, you have some of a shortfall from COVID expenses from the state aid, roughly $275,000. Is it realistic for you to submit some of that money to either get it back from the COVID relief fund or the ESSER fund?
So we have already, and that's a great question. We have already applied, those revenue sources, if you will, from those COVID revenue sources inside the COVID budget. So in essence, yes, they are being balanced off, if you will, on some of those expenses. It's important to note too that that contract that was approved does not have to be the whole full school year. So if we see conditions change, if this vaccine becomes, the miracle that we all hope it will be, and we have less concern about transmission of the virus, we may not need to have those continual services. We did submit all of this to FEMA for reimbursement, but we're not lucky to get a big reimbursement at this point.
Okay. Going to page, I think it's at the end where it says other consideration for FY22 budget.
Yes.
On the FY22 budget.
It's a chart.
the chart.
That's the enrollment.
It was about, it had healthcare, it said it's 6%, and it had dental. I
Yeah.
have it down here at page 15, but
Yeah, it's the third from the last. Keep going.
yeah,
There you
there
go, there you
it is, there it is. Okay, okay. I understand that you're saying that the health care is gonna go up roughly 6 to 9%, and the dental is gonna go up. But even so, you could put numbers in there, can't you? Because you know what the cost is now, and you can just anticipate the increase.
That's a fair question. We actually discussed that, Ms. Baker and I today, about putting numbers in there. So we didn't have as accurate numbers as we had hoped, so we left it as a percentage, but we can certainly get that information going forward as we have time to do those calculations, certainly.
And on top of that, we're right in the middle of open enrollment. So people are shifting from different plans right in the middle of doing this at the same time.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Okay. And the last thing I had was on the capital improvement, the $8.7 million. If I'm correct, you have that facilities conditions assessment already, you have that. So that's something that, I don't know if it's not like 100 pages, that may be something that you might want to share with us.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. And I think that is it. Thank you very much. I appreciate your effort. Stay off of Facebook. And
Don't worry about it. I do.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Corenthal. Anyone else from the town side, town council would like to have comments or questions about the presentation? Mrs. Engelhardt.
Yeah, I just have one question. First of all, thank you very much to Mrs. Meyer. That was an excellent presentation. And she did have my children, so she can tell stories, so I'm not going to say much. But I was curious, what is on the chart, one of the, I think page 5, it's the fringe benefits, it's item number 52000. I'm just curious what those fringe, is that post-employment benefits, or is it just something that has to do with employment? It's under salaries on review of the FY21 budget.
That's healthcare.
Oh, that is healthcare.
And those other benefits that are afforded to faculty and staff.
Oh, okay. And then, I'm sorry, the other one would be purchase property services. Is that?
So that's where we expensed out the Roman contract. And Ms. Baker, do you have other, I mean, I have the budget right here, so I can actually look at it for you. But do you have more detail on that?
Yes, that's a lot of the, it is the Roman contract as well. And let me just write that to you in a second.
I have it right here if you want me to. $54,000.
It's mostly all the supplies and a lot of supplies that are in there as well.
Okay.
Technology and some other items.
Rubbish, yeah, there's a lot of inside the, the facilities budget, typical facilities costs.
Okay.
Right. Yep, exactly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yes, Mrs. I'm looking for anybody else. Mrs. Corenthal, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have another question. Could you explain? I know you've explained it. I heard you explain it, but explain it again about what's going on with subs, because I see online there's a lot of different opinions and people don't know the facts. So you want to explain that a little bit?
Sure. Here are the facts. In my presentation to the school committee, when I was recommending the 8 days of distance learning, part of the rationale, a big part of the rationale is staffing. So here's an example. This is a real life example that happened today. I learned right before this meeting at about 5:30 that we have a staff member that has tested positive. That staff member, so that impacted 3 people that she works with, other staff members inside of a classroom in the whole classroom. Additionally, there's coverage that happens as a result of that. And there are another 2 people that were close contacts, and students are impacted as well. So I had a slide, and I just add that little caveat to give you how dynamic this situation is at any given moment. So today, for example, we did learn that 2 staff members were positive. We had on December 11th, I think it was the slide, we had 25 teachers or staff members that were either teaching or working remotely. Those were only the remote workers. In addition, on that day, there were, and I'm citing this off the top of my head, but my recollection, I did a little bit of a small analysis. We had more than 20 classrooms that were not covered on that day. So as a teacher, you know what that means. So in order to make those work in our schools to remain open, we all share the coverage, if you will, for those classes. And, you risk sort of, compromising the sanctity of the, the pods and all of that. So it's just a incredibly dynamic situation that you cannot plan for, because you will learn of a test result, and that test result could have sweeping impacts on your ability to open your schools, or to properly and safely staff your schools and properly educate kids. So every day it's a new story, but I would say our fill rate is only at 50%. And I can look at that trend data inside of our ASAP portal that is where we do our sub work. We have 25 subs. Our human resource person, Ms. Emilio, has been remarkable. We have 25 regular subs working every day. But as you know, it's a challenge. What's happening is where folks would typically pick up a job, an opening was out there and a sub would come in. People aren't doing that unless they're connected with the district regularly, because they're frightened. So it's a challenge every day.
I'd also like to sort of add on to that. Certainly there's been a lot of chatter recently in the community. We've also had our own chatter. We approximately a year ago, the school committee approved an increase to the school nurse rate, the substitute nurse rate. And then in the springtime, we approved a raise to our substitute teachers. In each instance, we recognized, and there was discussion around the fact that the current rates in each instance were well below market, and that we wanted to at least approve a raise to get us sort of in the market rate, the going rate ballpark, but recognizing that we wanted to revisit that in each instance. And that's something that we're going to need to discuss sooner rather than later, because it could also have some impact on next year's budget. And the remainder of this year as well. Mr. Donegan.
Hello. I have 3 things. The first is that we mentioned the busing contract that you're going to have to negotiate. I just wanted to remind anybody who wasn't around at the last budget session. There was the question of whether, since we weren't using the services, whether we were going to pay them anything. And Mr. Dronzek made an argument that to keep them viable, just so they're around, you were going to negotiate some payment. It was a little more than that, but that was my takeaway. And so as a lawyer, I thought we give all kinds of good arguments about impossibility of contract, et cetera. And I'm sure Matt advised you guys, and I have the greatest respect for him. As you negotiate, you could remind them that you paid 125 or 60, whatever the number was, probably, just for some consideration in that regard. So that's one thing I recall. 2 other things. One is when we look at projections for enrollment, I don't know what's behind them, But I can tell you that you'll never meet a bigger doubting Thomas on the number of students in a projected housing circumstance than I am. And that doesn't come from school committee. It comes from being on the planning board for 6 years. If I look in hindsight at all the presentations on how many children would be in the cottages on Green, right? 0, right? Or how many would be in another circumstance when it's 1 bedroom versus 3 bedrooms, you know, none of the normal intuitive assumptions that we would make ever played out. They were wrong in hindsight 100% of the time. And so when my first time going through this, I didn't do it on the council, I did it on the planning board for capital improvement budget purposes, but we looked at this and it was really challenging. If you talk to Lisa, our director of planning, fabulous. You won't find anyone better. And it's a head scratcher really for her to look at that. And every time we had a comp plan, comp permit application, and I know that Mr. Murphy has experienced this, but every time you have one, the planning board's always concerned about the impacts, right? Fiscal impacts, students, number of children. We just want to understand what they are. And every application is different. There's every version of expert to tell you that. And it was really challenging, as I recall, to try to land that somewhere. And so if, while it's always going to be a guess, and it's whoever the expert of the day is who's doing the guessing, who's feeding us the information. A lot of it's statistical data, experiences in other places, but this is all local. And that's why we find anomalous results. And so I know that we talked before the last round about having engagement with the planning department, only because they have very different experience some expert doing statistical evaluation might have. And so we're never going to make this real, I don't think. It's really a projection and it's guesswork by people we all hire. But to the extent that you can coordinate with the planning department and somehow address some of that as we move forward and discuss in detail the projections, I know that would help me. And the last thing is that you mentioned, Alexis, that there was some monies to be spent on security. What I recall is that years ago, the school committee had worked with the police department and the town and come up with a whole security plan, which had different levels of security. When the capital improvement monies as part of the CIP came in front of the planning board, I know that we all had to meet in executive sessions so that was private. But there were identifiable benchmarks and level 1 actions. When we did this a year ago, and even 2 years ago, when we talked about supplemental appropriation, I know that the council was very interested in making sure that we had all of our level 1 security measures addressed. And I know that we can't address all of them publicly, but to the extent that we could have an update as to whether all the level 1s have been done, or whether some of what you'll be looking for to do this round involves completing those. I really think that it's time for us to complete all of them. And that's a priority for me. And I think our council expressed that before. To the extent that you could tell us they're done, that's helpful. And that this is maybe level 2. Or if they aren't done and we need to have an executive session on that, I think we can do it. Or maybe you have a creative way to present some amount of money that would complete level 1, and maybe we don't need to, as the council and the committee decide. But I think that's an important thing for all of us to consider, and we're just kind of catching up to it. So anything you can do to help us in that regard, I know I would appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donegan. I don't know, Ms. Meyer, if you want to respond to that, but these are certainly additional opportunities, as a few of us have individually had conversations about opportunities and sort of setting agendas in our heads for joint conversations. That certainly falls within that when we're talking about enrollment projections with the help of planning, among other things, and the security update. Mrs. Meyer?
No, absolutely. I concur, Madam Chair. And I think that's a great point, Mr. Donegan, with regard to the planning board. And I will remind you, because you probably can recollect this, and so can Renu, maybe. When we were planning for the building of Cole Middle School, we had we used the NESDEC numbers, but the building committee at the time employed a demographer as part of that work. And at that time, and that was extensive, right, over many years, and looking at all of this statistic analysis. And the final analysis was the building would never exceed 597 students. In 2016, there were 683 students. There's, more than 600 students there now. So those are just projections, and there are a multitude of factors, as you know, that impact students enrolling, and economic conditions, and it's a complex matter. So it's a point well made. And then we can work to the chair's point. We can work on a presentation or update on those level one work, and I can work with Ms. Powell on that as well.
Thank you. I don't know if Ms. Powell wants to speak, but I do know that Ms. Bourbonnais is part, I believe, of the facilities committee or the buildings committee, whatever. So there's the beginning, and Ms. Powell sort of started to carve that out as well, of a greater number of opportunities for that type of collaboration.
Yes. So the enrollment study that was done by Milo and McBroom that was presented to you last year that Mrs. Meyer presented tonight. So that was done in conjunction. It's part of master planning, but it was done in conjunction with Lisa Bourbonnais and the planning department. And she's a member of the facilities committee. She has to be a standing member of any buildings committee that we have. So any construction, anything that we put in goes through her as well. And she and Mr. Nada are also copied on the facilities committee minutes, and they're invited to any meetings where we are going to be discussing anything like that. And so we have it's already planned that we are going to do an update of that enrollment study because it was completed prior to several developments that have been approved. And the conditions at the end that Mrs. Meyer spoke about looking at the turnover of single family homes based on a lot of 55+ communities, housing markets, which has become red hot in the last several months. As we know, houses in East Greenwich stay on the market for less than 24 hours. Some of the other factors that they talked about, those were all, and possible universal pre-K, depending on, which did get mentioned again in the budget. It did not, that initial grant for seats did not get cut from the governor's budget in the new skinny budget. That money stayed there. So these are all considerations we're looking at that we have discussed because Ms. Bourbonnais did think that Milo and McBroom's projections were low and that we're going to have to recommission another study based on that she'll be working with us. So to all your points, Mr. Dunnigan, we are also skeptical. When those numbers came back, we all went like this because of what happened with coal. And so that is something that we are actively working on. It won't stay stale, we promise. That's a living document as we work through master planning. So
thank you. And one of the examples, Allison, thanks, I appreciate that. I'm sure you guys are all over it. I just wanted to express that when we delve into the projections, just to let you know kind of my bad experience with it, not from the school committee, just on the planning side, it's impossible. And one of the issues that we've discussed at the council level and the planning board has had to wrestle with is just think when Joe Duarte tries to look at our sewer use projection. What we do is we look at a map and we say, okay, this is zoned for X.
Yeah.
So if it's a farm or if it's single family homes, you can get 5 homes. But tomorrow somebody comes in, makes it a comp permit application and proposes 100 units. We don't have a lot of control over that. And that means you get the children that you have to educate and we fund it. And so we're trying to wrestle with that. That's a lot of why our experiences have been challenging.
Yes, and I appreciate you saying that from your perspective, from your experience on the planning board, because I think that was one of, if not the most major, I don't want to say bone of contention with the consultants who did it, but where we kept going back at them because they kept saying, oh no, this kind of unit and all the comparable communities, maybe you'll get one child, or most houses in East Greenwich only average like 1.3 school-age children, and we're like, well, where are they all coming from then? So it's good to hear you say that that is the experience, because that was our expectation, and we were frankly surprised by how low the projection was. And in our last budget cycle, I'm not sure if you remember this, but I do, when we were doing enrollment numbers, and Superintendent Meyer was giving their actuals, those actuals were tracking with the high end that had been projected for that year already. And the study wasn't even a year old, and we were already tracking up well above the midpoint. So yeah, to that point, I think we do
The
need
projections that the developers give us with their experts, who are all planners, right? Who have now gone into private practice. They're all from other communities. They're their director of planning, who are now advocating for all this. They have all the tools. The day the last CO is there and somebody occupies it, it already looks wildly different than whatever the projection was, whether it was high or low. And I think that it feels a lot like whatever you do to manage budgets and we help with, that school funding formula and population projections are going to be macro factors that we need to work hard at. And I'm not sure how we address them, but we need to participate at that level, I think. Thank you.
And this will be the last thing I'll say about this. So the three reports that Superintendent Meyer told you about, the enrollment study, the facilities condition assessment, and the site and space utilization, the intent was all of these would be rolled up, and then we'd be able to present them to the school committee, to the town council in a meeting like this, to give everyone that data as we move into the planning process. That didn't happen because everything sort of got put on hold in March. However, if there is interest, we can always have Colliers would be more than happy to come and present all that data to all of you at any time. You just need to let us know. So we weren't keeping it a secret or anything.
Thank you for that. It occurs to me that I didn't forget about COVID for a moment, but as I'm sitting here marveling that only the first half of the joint meeting has lasted longer than an hour and a half, when we had anticipated the entire joint meeting would last an hour, that we've got a lot to talk about. So, and it's been good discussion. Are there any other comments, questions about the school committee presentation before we turn it back over to Dr. Schweiger and the town presentation? So thank you all again. Thank you to Mrs. Meyer. Thank you to our legislators, and thank you, Dr. Schweiger.
Yes, thank you. This is obviously a dynamic conversation, a lot of engagement, a lot of energy. I'm sure we could go longer, but we want to give Mr. Nada a chance here to shine a little bit also, as Ms. Myers did with her presentation. So, the budget, this is really a preliminary meeting. It is a reflection of our priorities and goals. I think we've stated a lot of those today. As Mr. Munoz said, we really want to identify where our revenues may be able to generate new revenues or have shortfalls, and what are the major cost drivers that may hurt us as far as expenses. So I think what I'd like to do is now move to the council side and ask Mr. Nada to edit his presentation a bit. So instead of perhaps going through the entire presentation, I think, Andy, if you can use the slides that you think are appropriate, but really to identify revenues, where you see where we can do well on revenues, where might be some weaknesses, and the same with expenses. Are we doing well? What are our potential cost drivers? And then we can open it up to questions. We will have at the end an opportunity for public comment as well. So Andy, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Great, thanks, Dr. Schweiger, members of the council and school committee. It's nice to have you on board this evening. So I'm going to run through this kind of rapid fire. So what I've put together is just for reference purposes. So there's no smoking gun in any of the information I put together. It is so far so early in the process for us, 5 months in, that we don't even have a reference to an FY20 audit yet fully completed. So the information, even at the tail end of this presentation, dealing with fund balance, is from FY19. So that's one of the reasons why we don't rush in with a lot of data too early in the process. So this for me is really just an update, as Dr. Swager, you just mentioned, as to where we stand in FY21. Clearly a different year, right? So this is not a normal year where you'd hear some basic information, our status at 40 or 50% of expenditures and revenues. This is a different year, as the superintendent noted a number of times in her presentation. So what I've provided is just something, just tuck it in your file for budget, use it as a reference. We start off with a nice breakdown of, so you have an idea on timeline, I might make a few references to that. It's just on the budget process itself, which is pretty much an October through June process here in East Greenwich. So you can follow along with some of the schedule and some of the information as to the deadlines, some of the statutory requirements where we are. When I go into the projections on the next slide, Wendy, we're going to move through these really quickly. So this is FY21, and so what I'd like to tell you about these two columns is that we can't take credit for everything here, but we can take credit for some of it. So on the expenditure side, we had a very systematic, conservative approach based on all the uncertainty that we were facing. So we really didn't have much of a choice. We have left unfilled positions that are funded. We've left them unfilled. We have constricted operations. We've pulled back on really spending virtually nothing on capital improvements 5 months into the year, unless it was a dire situation. We've held back, as previously discussed, some of our major studies in terms of waterfront and parking studies, other major initiatives the council was working on. We've decided to hold back due to the uncertainty, which was really paramount. So not only at the national level, but even in the state level. And just this past week with the House presenting that budget, I'd like to thank both our senator and rep for the hard work that they put in. A lot of people for many, many months have been echoing concerns of school districts and municipalities around the state. And I'd like to think that the House and Senate will go through an approval process very, very quickly, and we'll have an approved budget. For me, that is a significant piece of information for us. So we were facing, and I'm going to keep this high level, two major issues. One is total uncertainty on revenue coming in. We're talking about revenue, right? State aid, municipal and pass-through aid, appropriated and pass-through, as well as state education aid. So to know that those are being funded in a unique way, right? With less state revenue, with some CRF funding that's being proportionately allocated throughout the state in various forms based on certain formulas that are being used. But all I need to know is that the aid is being funded. So that's great news. Superintendent and I were talking about it before we started tonight's meeting. So we're going to check that box off, right? So the second piece really comes down to expenditures. So the school and the town took two divergent approaches because we really felt we had to. The town, we could constrict, and we reduced expenditures. We held back on personnel in case the state aid and federal funding wasn't there. The school, on the other hand, you couldn't open your doors unless you met state mandates, met RIDE's expectations, and you funded at a higher level and dealt with a multitude of other issues in school reopening costs just to get the doors open, get kids back in school. So we had to kind of move in two different directions. So what you're looking at here is our capital reserve funds. We were looking at expenditures that were significantly reduced with an unaudited total, a surplus on the town side of about $750,000. And as part of that, we were able to transfer capital funds into a reserve. As if you recall from this past year, we had initially started the budget process with over an $800,000 pay-as-you-go program. We reduced that to $100,000, again, just as a safety net in case it was needed. On the revenue side, I think that number you're looking at the bottom of the page, again, only 5 months in. So both these numbers are going to change. I'm not expecting revenue surplus to increase, and I'm not expecting expenditure surplus to increase. I'm expecting that to come down now that we're starting to have a little more optimism. We're going to start to fill positions. So our expenditure side is going to start to increase, and any surplus that we see in FY21, if we're so fortunate, will be less than what's anticipated. On the revenue side, you can attribute that to the hard work coming out of the finance department and our finance director, Trish Sunderland. So you're seeing significant increases in some of the assumptions from our collection activity. And we understand that some of these concepts were not openly embraced because they do impact residents. And what we had found is that there had not been in recent years a very concerted effort on just performing our due diligence from within, making sure that we're having collections, making sure we're following up on motor vehicle taxes that are not paid, using the statutory restrictions that we have available to us, such as DMV blocks, which is always a popular topic with residents, as well as delinquent notices, has really put us in an extraordinarily strong position when one would expect revenues to be down. We're making up for that shortfall. And so right now we're looking at an estimate of about 1.1 million, or a projected collection rate that should hopefully exceed 98% by year end. So again, that being said, that number is probably going to soften. And I'd like to caution everybody, this is a snapshot in time. Right. So you can't take this information and say, my goodness, look at the position the town's in at this point. So the softening of revenue and the economy that we're in right now, and I'm sure Gina and I will debate this later at some point, will be and collaborate on a conversation about what the greatest influence are going to be. But, you know, we're a community like every other in Rhode Island that relies extremely heavily on property taxes. We're doing very well at the moment. With the type of economy that we have in Rhode Island, that's supposed to soften, that's supposed to lag a little bit. So we wouldn't expect to see a softening for another year or two, and then it will begin to affect us. The other issue is really the seasonality and the type of employment that we have, where, you know, clearly our businesses have been extremely hit. Not all businesses, right? Depends on what industry you work in. So Wendy, let's keep moving along. So what I'm going to say is the economic impact is going to change over time. You know, the present year we're in a statistical revaluation. So at the end of FY20, those are going to be the values that we're using in the formulation of our next budget. So we expect to continue to see growth. And as was noted in the school's presentation and by a number of people on the line today, our values are extremely high. The market is better than really anybody anticipated. So construction is doing well. And I attribute some of that to the leadership in the state that allowed the construction industry to keep working during the pandemic. There are others. I've known a lot of people in Massachusetts, and that was really that had a dire effect in terms of really stifling growth. I'm sure they're going to recover at some point, but we've kind of haven't missed a beat in terms of that particular industry. So you can track the property value increases that we're seeing over the last several years. Wendy? Education aid, municipal aid, I'm not going to comment any further. I think the numbers are very good. With the school looking at an additional $758,000 this year, and hopefully in excess of $1 million next year. As the representative and senator noted, I think we'll all have to be very active in that conversation. And I think as our population, one of the few in the state or district, continues to grow, I think that's going to be a call to arms from everybody in our district to be able to maintain a strong foothold in terms of our presence in that conversation with education aid going forward. Wendy? Departmental increases, a couple of basic assumptions. We do not have a lot of good information right now. None of the town's contracts are up for renegotiation this next year. It's going to be the following year where all of the town's contracts are going to be up for negotiation. Our laborers, NEA, IBPO, and IAFF contracts. So they're all going to come up at the same time. That's good and that's bad. So it depends on what side of the table you're sitting on and really what the economy is looking at that particular moment in time. We do not yet have updates from the state. Early projections came out on education aid, but have not come out on municipal aid. So we're unable to really provide you with some of the retirement estimates. Basic healthcare, I know it came up as a percentage discussion early. A lot of times what I've seen, if you go back over 10 years, I think there's consistently been anywhere from a 5 to 10% increase in healthcare, health insurance and dental in a given year. Those rates fluctuate. And I think at a very early point in time, I think we play the safer role, because I think people focus in on a given number, and that number is most likely going to change dramatically based on how we negotiate those services out during the rest of the year before we enter into or renew an existing contract that we might have. Wendy? These next slides we're going to move through very, very quickly. So let's just keep going, Wendy. Let's go to the next slide. Expenditures here. So this just gives you a little bit of detail on some of the points that I noted earlier regarding as to where that $500,000+ on expenditure side comes from. Wendy? Here, I'd like to stop for a moment. So for me, with the hopeful approval of the state budget, all of my attention now is being focused on COVID expenditure reimbursement. So we'll be engaging every city in town. And I think as you as we learn more about the development of the state budget, there were additional funds that were placed in the state budget to support municipalities based on a per capita alignment on population statewide. That's going to provide for some additional funding. I believe on the municipal side, I believe that number early on was about $112,000. So every bit helps. We are not seeing in this national emergency and national incident anywhere near the reimbursement levels that we see in the majority of other similar events. And typically they're natural disasters. They're hurricanes, they're flooding, they're freezing, power outages, things of that nature. We're not seeing it here. So what we're going to be relying on, and part of the state funding is to assist us with this, is to make up the 25% that we're not getting back from FEMA, that's town and school, but it's also to help us address some of the other legitimate COVID-related expenses that both the town and the school have incurred that we are just not seeing. The funding is not there, or we're not seeing it through FEMA. So that's going to be an area that you're going to see me and I think other officials around the state. And clearly, the line is now blurred. There is no town and school line when you're dealing with our federal delegation or you're dealing with FEMA. It's the community. So whatever our message is the same for both, and whether the school were to receive additional funding or the town would as well, there's a benefit to the community by seeing that improvement. So we're going to continue to march and beat that drum as we go forward. Wendy? This is just a quick reference on OPEB. So OPEB is something that we do need to focus on in future years with some contractual adjustments that were made. We did see a benefit in FY19 where you can look at the overall OPEB liability was reduced dramatically and our net position was increased. So our overall net position percentage-wise did increase from 7 to about 9.4%. But where we are today, based on economic uncertainty, we're just focused on our ARC payment, our annual required contribution. We're not really investing additional dollars, which we should be on an annual basis. So we look forward to that opportunity where we can generate some solid surpluses, year after year in a much more stable and less volatile environment, and begin to make an investment to start to improve the percentage. If you look statewide, every community is different. On the state of Rhode Island's municipal finance portal, the information is a bit dated, but you could see communities everywhere from a 0% to 100% funded. So, we're at 9.4%, so we've got some work ahead of us, but it could be worse. And I think we're in an okay position, but we do need to give this some attention in the future. This is just a quick snapshot on the capital reserve funding I noted. So we are still in a holding pattern regarding use of these funds, but as with the school, I think both the town and the school were playing catch up. And I think that's what some of the $8.7 million in deferred capital improvements for the school that were noted in the presentation are. The town was in the same exact position this past year with the $2.7 million bond issue that had been authorized. We're basically playing catch up. And so I think we'd like to get to the point where there's much less focus on bonding routine capital as much as we can, and really focusing on getting to a really healthy place where we can address both town and school annual capital needs on an annual pay-as-you-go basis. So that's something we're going to work towards. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think we're already moving in that direction. Wendy? This is just a couple of comments, a basic kind of framework as how the town operates in terms of its capital improvement planning, and then also noted some comments that I just made about our approach in terms of trying to get back to that pay-as-you-go model as much as possible. Wendy? So here is just a quick snapshot. So all the information, the statistical information here, Trish put together for us on a quick update. So this is just a kind of captured a lot of the refunding and some of the $2.7 million bond. If you look under the top section, the third line down, that new 2.7. Then if you scroll down onto the school side, you'll also see probably the first reference, as well as that narrative at the very bottom of the page to the school department's $5 million capital bond. So not all of that bond has been issued yet, and that will really be predicated on the timeline associated with this, which was also referenced by the superintendent, by the application for housing aid support that's set to Phase 2 will be going in February. And then you've got subsequent approvals that happen in May, and I think may have been pushed back as far as September based on a COVID, we'll call it a COVID delay. But in the school, the fourth line down reflects $785 million. I'm sure, Alexis, you wish it was $785 million, right? So $785,000, which was the first allotment of capital improvements in that $5 million bond, and which has already been issued as part of the town's $2.7 million general obligation bond. So what really we're focused on there, and then I'll stop, is just the school is going through a process of prior approved applications. And so we need to ensure that the new projects that have already been earmarked are approved by RIDE through their formal application process. And that's to ensure that we protect the reimbursement of anywhere between 35 to as much as just over 50%. And when you're talking about another balance of about $4.2 million remaining, all of which may be eligible based on the nature of the individual project submitted, that's a lot of money. You know, you're in the $1.5 million to $2 million range. So we need to really ensure that we're partnering with the school, we're timing the projects, and should projects need to be started earlier, we just need to ensure that the appropriate approvals are in place, whether or not they're emergency related or not, but just that we're protecting that potential for reimbursement, because it's a significant amount of reinvested dollars that will be available to the school at some point in the future. Wendy? And finally, this is fund balance, but again, these are FY 19 figures at about 6.8 million. We, some of our early projections place this number a little over $7 million and place our percentages hopefully in excess of 11% as we finish up the FY 20 year. But Trish is working with our auditor, Bloom Shapiro, and we hope to have at least an initial draft out hopefully in the next month or two, and then a final document to follow fairly soon. So that really wraps up the presentation. It's high level. It's for kind of a check and balance and just to kind of check in as to where we are. And just as a recap, I would say we're going to continue. We're assuming that the House and Senate will do their part and will approve the budget. So our aid will be in place. We're going to continue to monitor our expenses and track our revenues that are being generated very closely. Should they continue to track positively, the town needs to really at this point start to refill just so we can deliver services. We need to start to refill some of our vacant positions. We'll do that in a very systematic and mindful way of the climate that we're in. And then we'll continue to work very closely with our school department in terms of tracking all resources and ability to recover as much of those COVID reimbursement, the COVID expenditures that we possibly can, and working with our federal delegation. I'm going to just stop there and happy to follow up with everybody in the future. And I know, Ann, we had spoken previously that Trish and I are happy when you're ready at some point in the future and we have reliable information. We're happy to make a visit to a school committee meeting and we can continue the conversation.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. A lot of information there. Very good overview. If anyone has any questions, we'll throw it open to both school committee and town council. Questions for the manager or for general discussion? I can't see hands, but I don't see anybody. Oh, Councilor Engelhardt.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I mean, the increase in the healthcare cost is between 5 to 10% per year, and that's rising higher than inflation. I mean, that's typical? I guess I never.
So those are estimates that we use early on, Renew, and so ultimately the true actual is going to be dependent on our experience. Both the town municipal employee and then the school side may vary just based on the experience and claims.
Is that typical for most municipalities of our size? I mean, I guess.
I would hate to say so, but yes, it is. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I do not see any other hands. I would say that what Mr. Nada has summarized today and reviewed, the council has seen a lot of this before. We had a quarterly update of our revenues and expenses at the end of October. So a lot of this material is familiar to the council. And as Andy said, as time goes on, we can flesh this out when we have more solid numbers. And we are going to be meeting again with the school committee in the end of February. So at this point, I would like to open up the meeting to public comment. If people have been listening and they have any comments they'd like to make at this time, if you're on the Zoom platform, if you go to participants at the bottom of the participants list, you'll see a raise hand button. If I see there's one phone-in caller, if they'd like to raise their hand, they dial *9 on their phone. So I'd like to see at this time, are there any public comments? I don't see any hands raised. So I think we're approaching the end of our joint meeting. I think we've thoroughly met our statutory requirement here. I do want to say before the school committee, we let them go, that there are 2 members of the school committee who are going to be recognized on the town council agenda tonight. Kevin Murphy for his service on the planning board, and Tim Hangen for his service on the board of canvassers. So I'd like to in advance thank them very much for their service. And you traded that in for the school committee, and I'll have to ask you whether you think that was a good decision or a bad decision, maybe a year down the road. But thank you for your service on our boards and commissions, and it's great to have you on the school committee.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you all. Thanks for noticing. I appreciate that, Mark.
And if there's no final comments, I think we'll let the school committee get back to their evenings. And if Chair Musella would like to adjourn her group, we can then let them go.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Schweiger, counselors, Mr. Nada, Trish, everybody. And again, just as Mr. Nada said, we still have a lot of business to tend to jointly, and we are actively planning and thinking about how we will have additional joint discussions, because we have a lot of problems to solve together. So I just appreciate that. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the school committee. So moved by Ms. Powell.
Seconded.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Murphy. And we haven't done our roll call vote while we've been in joint session. I guess I do that, right? So all in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Allison Powell.
Aye.
Ann Musella. Aye. Next would be Jean Quinn.
Aye.
Kevin Murphy.
Aye.
Lori McEwen.
Aye.
Tim Munoz.
Aye.
Will Hangen.
Aye.
And with that, the school committee is adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Great meeting.
Good night to our school committee colleagues.
Bring
And we'll
cookies
continue.
next time.
We will continue with our town council meeting. Item 3 is public comment. If any members of the public would like to comment on items not on the agenda, this is your opportunity. So this would not be related to the joint meeting, some other town item. Seeing no comments, we'll move on to our consent calendar. The consent calendar is a series of items that can be voted on as a group. They tend to be routine matters of town government. So I will walk us through the agenda items on the consent calendar tonight. We have the minutes from September 29th, 2020 regular meeting. We have the minutes from October 13th, 2020 regular meeting. We have a commendation for Ashley Cullion for serving over 6 years on the Zoning Board of Review. So thank you very much, Ashley, for your service to the town. We also have commendations for Nicole D'Amato for serving over 2 years on the Historic District Commission. And we have a commendation, as I mentioned earlier, for Kevin Murphy on the Planning Board for the past year, and for Will Hangen for serving over 1 year on the Board of Canvassers. We really appreciate all the service that our residents provide on these boards and commissions, and we'll make sure their commendations are delivered to them by mail. We also have an authorization to sell a 2005 Chevy Tahoe to the highest bidder using Gov Deals. Approval of a 2021 town holiday schedule. Approval of a 2021 town council regular meeting dates. We also have approval of a petition of the National Grid and Verizon New England for joint or identical pole location on Crompton Road. We have a recommendation from the interim tax assessor to abate to the 2020 real estate tax rolls $2,167.27 for assessor granted appeals. And lastly, we have an award to bid Carty Corporation for the purchase of winter sand in the amount of $15.50 per ton. And that contract is under the state master price agreement. So if any counselors would like an item pulled off for further discussion, please raise your hand.
I'll make a motion to approve the entire consent calendar unless everybody wants to go line by line.
Mr. Donegan, did you want to pull something off, or are you just making a motion?
No, I did want to pull something. I just wanted Andy to comment on the holiday schedule, whether that's some deviation or some ratification we do every year, and I just didn't know what it was.
Which Andy?
Not you.
Okay.
Not up.
Andy, not as Grin.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
that means that's the Lee Grin. So I just, I've been publishing that kind of for years just to have it out there so people know what we're recognizing as town holidays, which is usually driven by the state holiday schedule, so we can plan our meetings accordingly. And it helps me to see if there's going to be any conflicts with our meeting schedule, which is also being considered tonight. So really just more of a formality to get it out there to show everybody that that's what we're following.
So it's not a deviation from last year's holiday schedule?
No.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
Other items? I think, Mr. Zarella, did you have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Zarella, seconded by Councilor Donegan. We'll take the roll. Councilor Corenthal,
Aye.
Councilor Donegan,
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt,
Aye.
Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Mark Schwager votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Consent calendar is passed. This brings us back to Mr. Nada once again. And so, Mr. Nada, I'll turn the agenda over to you for your reports and presentation.
Great, thanks, Dr. Schwager. So I've highlighted a couple of key topics. I'm going to talk about two of them today. The first one is just an update on page 1 regarding the Rhode Island pause, the pause that we're in the extension of 1 week. I think it was clear from the very beginning, based on the timing associated when the pause went into effect, that there was really no way that it was not going to be extended in some way. So I would be very surprised if our numbers in Rhode Island decrease to the point where there's going to be an allowable significant softening in restriction even after the 20th. Although what I would say is I tried to capture as much of the information in as simple a form as possible for everyone to look at. I think if you go online, there's just so much information that's out there. But I think the chart on page 2 does a decent job of showing kind of where we are from the 13th to the 20th, and then ultimately where we're going to be beginning the 21st. And I think that the governor and the health department will have a very tight leash on some of the capacity issues and some of the meeting sizes as we go forward. I think we all understand that the next subject I'm going to roll into is I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about the vaccination process, and that's going to be kind of where I ended today. But that's going to have a significant bearing on all of us over the next 6 months. So I would say that the likelihood in having just left our school department, it's very unlikely that there's going to be a major change between now and when school goes back into session, right? So other than a dramatic improvement in compliance measures by the general public, that's going to be awfully tough to do with multiple holidays happening during that period of time where families are as much or more so prone to get together for social gatherings as over Thanksgiving. So we're going to continue to work on that as we go forward. But what I would like to do is just roll in so people have an understanding, and they may have read in the local media, they may see it on statewide media regarding these meds pods, medical emergency distribution system, and the pod being point of dispensing for the vaccine. Everyone is seeing the vaccines are being distributed. Well, one right now, Pfizer vaccine in the US being distributed around the country. We have a meeting tomorrow on a statewide level, a couple of hundred people that will be talking with Department of Health regarding as to when the vaccine is going to show up here in Rhode Island. As mentioned previously, but I'll do it in a little bit more detail right now. We have 6 days. East Greenwich is the host for the mid-state region, as noted on page 3. There are 5 regions in Rhode Island, not by county or not by any other configuration other than the MedsPod plan. So we are part of the mid-state region. We were asked to be the lead coordinator. So we are hosting this controlled, closed pod at Swift Community Center. What that basically means when I say it's closed, it is not open to the public. So individuals that are pre-registering in advance based on their inclusion in the health critical as a healthcare worker and or a certified EMS professional, as well as some firefighters, are included in this phase 1A category. What's going to happen from that point is that we will distribute to those individuals a link to be able to get into a system to actually set up their own appointment. So there's going to be a registration that they go through, a process that they go through to allow them to actually receive the vaccine. So anyone who happens to show up at the site, whether they're in the field or not, if they're not in the state system, having registered for a particular time, we are not going to be able to accommodate them at all. So what we're doing is we've been asked to handle approximately 2,000 people. It's going to be over a 6-day period, predicated on many variables, many of which are still in play. So the likelihood is our schedule is going to change. But it's also very likely it's going to kick off on the day that we're recommending, and that's next Monday, the 21st. So we have a 3-week proposed schedule of the 21st, 22nd, Monday, Tuesday combinations, 21, 22, 28, 29, and the 4th and the 5th of January. That would allow us with 10 stations in Swift to be able to handle on a 10-minute increment, as they're going to be registering, 6 people per table per hour or 60 per hour at the site. That's the most that we're going to be able to handle. We're coordinating staffing of the site with our 6 other partners. So on one given day, like the city of Warwick has committed a full complement of people to manage the entire site for the entire day. They're coming not only with vaccinators, they're coming with admin, they're coming with other support. And then the smaller cities and towns that we're aligned with, we'll share in that on a daily basis. The town is actually handling some elements of the pod ourselves. And by doing that, anyone that strategically staffs the pod is able to register and receive the vaccine. So clearly that is the benefit of us hosting. So there are other key personnel within our organization that would have to wait till February or March to be vaccinated. We'd like to prevent from happening the recent spike in the number of cases that we saw in our fire department. We'd like to prevent that from happening in other departments. So we're going to be strategic about how we staff the event. We've encouraged our partners to also be strategic, and so that we hope to have some of our other key professional staff who have very high public contacts and are a critical part of our organization to receive the vaccine over this next month. Now, when we get through these 6 days, that's the first 6 days, right? We have to follow up in 3 weeks from now. It's between 21 to 24 days that we actually have to issue the second part of the vaccine. So that those individuals be contacted, they will have to reschedule, they're going to have to come back, and we'll make that happen. These costs are all part of our budget discussion that we just talked about. So my expectation, and as you know, I'm not bashful when it comes to making these comments, clearly the pandemic response and our ability to vaccinate this country is a federal initiative. And I think the costs need to be borne there. So we'll be communicating with our federal delegation. And I'm very confident that any costs that we incur associated with this initial phase or subsequent phases, even public phases later this spring and summer, should be fully reimbursable and what we're hoping is in that 4th stimulus that our federal delegation is working on. So there are a number of other factors here that are going to affect our schedule. You would assume for a minute that the full amounts coming to Rhode Island that Rhode Island needs, it's going to be just distributed through the 5 different regions and it's available. Not so. So we're still, we're booking out so that we have a minimum of 300 to 350 individuals on each day, but we're unsure yet whether or not we're going to have the vaccine quantities to handle that many on a daily basis, which is not the end of the world. It's just going to prompt us to modify our scheduling on later sessions. So I'm gonna stop there on that topic. Yes, Karen.
How does somebody register?
Yeah, so it's a closed process so that individuals that are being selected by the Department of Health who work that are critical healthcare workers, they'll be provided, they'll be controlling information to that group. Each pod with the Department of Health's support will be communicating with those members in our region that are EMS certified employees and firefighters. So those first responders, plus we will also coordinate with anybody who's working the particular site. They're going to receive direct access through a controlled link to get into the system to register. So that information will not be available to the general public. I think it's important to talk about it because people are seeing that there is a schedule. Not everybody's getting it at the same time. People are not necessarily understanding. They may feel that there is a way to access that information if they fall into a high-risk category. So that process and how it's being rolled out is being controlled at the state level with guidance from the CDC. So we're really going to be in the pipeline following those protocols as we go forward. Yes, Mike. You're muted, Mike.
There we go. So I appreciate the hope springs eternal that the federal government will reimburse us for this. I also think we need to step up anyway. And so, but I'm just wondering if you can give us any estimate, order of magnitude of our spend that we'll be chasing from the federal government. Any idea what that looks like?
Yeah, so Mike, for us, it's really comes down to just personnel, right? So it's going to be the limitations of our people that are not on the payroll already. That would be there on overtime, and that may be some of our vaccinators. The fact is we have to have a fully advanced life support rescue present each day, not just East Greenwich, but maybe another community. So we're not covering every day. So it's really going to be limited. The timing, which I didn't mention, our proposed timing is from 8 to 1 on a handful of days and from 4 to 9 on others. So it's going to depend on the shift that certain individuals are working. So that's a tough number to come up with, but I think spreading it across 7 communities, I think the number will be fairly negligible. All the supplies are provided and our building right now is not in use. So we're not really alienating any existing program from that particular space. So I think our cost will be minimal. Still important to actually recover that cost as we go forward because there are going to be other costs that we're not able to recover.
Is rental value of our Swift gym during that moment a recoverable cost?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say in other national events, even value placed on the dump truck, in the fire truck is all recoverable. We are not seeing any of those costs being recovered this time and in this pandemic situation. So it's very doubtful.
And Andy, is there any referee who decides what an appropriate commitment, equitable commitment of manpower and resources is? You know, it's nice that Warwick takes the whole day, but if their budget dwarfs ours, but you know what I mean? And some communities are smaller. Like, is there any, how do we referee that? Or are we just not looking at that and we're just doing the right thing and living with the outcome?
Yeah, no, I think we're trying to disperse it within the region, Mike. So I think for us, you know, we're trying to be fair. Every community, you know, a West Greenwich and an Exeter is not going to be able to put as much resources on the table. So what we're going to do is combine them as to like 25% each. And then we'll have another community like East Greenwich or Coventry or West Warwick step in and pick up the other 50% on that given day. And I think a lot of it's all going to depend on the scheduling. So the scheduling is critical for this population, especially the EMS personnel, because I can't take the whole department on one day because there is the potential of them being affected in some way, shape, or form by any number of side effects that may come with it. So we're spreading our personnel over all 6 days so that we can spread out any potential negative impact that might arise. So yeah, no, we're very cognizant of it. I feel good. This is, for me, this is not so much a hopeful wish. I think we'll get that fine. Other ones I have, Mike, I agree, very hopeful, but not in this case. I think we're good on terms of the reimbursement that we'll receive. And I think everyone is trying, as you noted, now's not the time that any of us are bickering over who's doing what. We're all coming together, including our own fire department that's playing a major role in terms of the vaccinations and other support that they're going to be providing. So, as well as other employees here in town hall and other departments, where everyone's just stepping up. A lot of them will work during their normal shift, and others will cover for them. So, we feel good about how it's coming together.
Okay, so the short answer is we're not writing lots of checks. It's really manpower, overtime, some of that for a window. And I appreciate that you are indeed a man of faith that the federal government will pay us for that. Thank you.
In this case, I am, yes.
Selective faith.
So the last thing I wanted to note, because it was I've got some other budget information. I think we covered a lot of that in the presentation. The last thing I wanted to just comment on, because it was covered quite extensively in the public over the last couple of weeks, was really some confusion associated with a COVID-related impact within our fire department, where there was a question of testing those employees that were positively affected. Clearly, it was determinative. They had symptoms, they were positive, were being treated one way based on a state statute that exists, which provides benefits to all police, fire, and EMS personnel that have exposure to an infectious disease. But when you look at the statute itself, it goes further. You know, that's not the extent of it, where it's just an exposure, such as any number of us having a family member that may test positive. We may have an exposure, but we may not manifest the virus may not manifest itself. So that's what it actually calls for. So we had 5 individuals who initially, upon testing, and this is not unique to East Greenwich, we were partnering with the testing with our neighbors in North Kingstown. Their fire department went through the same exact situation, where they had 10 members out of 15 that also had a change in the test result within days after the initial test. So what that is I made a reference to some terminology that was just generally being used in the public, even in the medical field. And it talks about false negatives and false positives. And so I made that statement about false positive, and really it wasn't necessarily applicable in this particular case due to the timing of when the tests occurred. I think for most lay people out there, you would say positive test, shortly after negative test, within 48 hours, another negative test, you're cleared to go back to work, you have no symptoms, you're good. And most people would say that's a false positive. There was a test that was positive that wasn't, that actually wasn't, and that 2 negatives defeat a positive. And that's really not how it works, right? So we got through the process, and I think that group of employees, what we opted to do is they're within the fire department's contract, and all firefighters are aware of this. There's a quarantine leave category for this particular type of issue, where a department member that has an exposure is required to quarantine. And so those employees were paid in full, but how that's calculated versus an IOD status and a full pay status on quarantine leave is slightly different, because there's various tax ramifications to how that's calculated. So what I needed in that time period, and I think all of you know me well enough by now in my 15th month, and we're getting kind of used to kind of how we do business in town, and I think other departments are as well. It comes down to really having some definitive answers. So what we did in concert with our partners in North Kingstown, myself, our fire chief, Pat Node, town manager, Mollis, as well as Scott Cattell, the North Kingstown fire chief, met with a group, as outlined in my report, from the Department of Health. I thought it was really a fantastic meeting. In that meeting, we had a number of doctors that were really leading the way, as well as a number of other key personnel that are involved with the Department of Health from the governor's office. And we had them captive for about 30 minutes. We asked all the questions that needed to be asked, and I think we got some tremendous answers. And I think, as I noted in the narrative that I provided to the council, I think at the end of the process, it was clear to me that everyone is still learning, and there's still much more to be learned in terms of the virus and how it's impacted, how individuals react to various tests. We learned a little bit more about the reliability of the CRF test, about the the post-virus antibody testing that they do as well. So I think at the end of the day, it was clear that the process, the travel of the test, the sample, the end result was still somewhat ambiguous and not determinative, really based on the individual and how they react to the virus. So for me, I'll always err on the side of caution and support for an employee in that situation. And in that particular case, I think it was clear to me that there was no other decision other than to alter the status of those 5 individuals to IOD status and treat them like every other member of that department. So, you know, someday it may be clear. It may be a yes, you have it, and no, you don't. And when that time happens, then a future application of that same state statute might be a little bit different. But I think in this case, I feel good about pausing for a moment, dealing with the professionals who do this work on a daily basis, some of the state leaders, as well as address some of the North Kingstown concerns, and then regrouping with our fire department leadership, which I did late last week, to let them know of that change. And so I think at this point, everybody, finance department's making the appropriate adjustments, appropriately so, and that matter has pretty much been put to bed at this point. So I'm going to stop there, Mark. I kind of roll those 2 topics together as related to COVID impact, but happy to answer any questions the council might have.
Mr. Donegan?
Andy, I know we had talked about this, and I think that's the right decision. And they're impacted when they have that test, as if it's positive, they have to quarantine, go home. I know, and the subsequent testing, I think you explained it, isn't always dispositive.
That's right.
So where does that leave them? In the same spot as if
Yes.
it were dispositive and the first test is always assumed to be positive. So I think that's probably the right place to land. Also, I know we briefly discussed what the economic impact to us is.
Mhm.
My guess is they get tax exempt treatment on their end if it's treated one way, but is it just the same expense to us?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. So there's no issue there.
Yep. Right. That
Very
makes sense to me. I think that's the right decision. Thank you.
Okay. You bet.
Other questions for the manager? Thank you for your update, Mr. Nada, and for your explanation on the testing in the fire department. Do we have any update on how our firefighters are doing, some who were ill?
Yeah, we actually do. The majority, and we kind of wrapped up that meeting the other day, really moving right into a discussion on the med pod, and the majority of our department is back. We still have a couple of members that have not yet returned who, as this virus has done to many, has affected them a little harder. And it's a little more challenging for them in their recovery than others who were still asymptomatic and quickly responded like nothing had happened. So the majority are back. I had word from the chief that additional employees will be returning this week. So really they're back. The department is back to normal scheduling at this point.
Good, thank you. So we wish speedy recovery to any who have not returned to work. And I guess the firefighters are in line for early vaccination once that rolls out, and as are other first responders.
That's correct.
Very nice report. And now, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to our public hearing section of our agenda. I see Carol Malaga is getting comfortable now. Welcome,
Good evening.
Carol. Good evening. So on our public hearing, we have 2 items. One is application for extended hours vittling licenses for PC Foods, doing business as McDonald's, Cumberland Farms on 3323 South County Trail, and Colbert Enterprises doing business as the Seasons Corner Market at 2563 South County Trail. So per Rhode Island General Law 524-1, the town council may approve extended hours between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., allowing for 24-hour operation. All 3 of these applicants have received approval for annual licenses on November 9th, and the requests for extended hours were advertised for 3 consecutive weeks. So I'll ask for a motion to approve the extended hours. We will have time for public comment before we do take a vote. So I see a motion from Councilor Corenthal. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Zarella. Questions from the council? Are there any members of the public during this public hearing? Yes, I'm sorry, Mr.
I
Donegan.
just wanted to understand, is there any reason why they haven't routinely asked to be 24/7? Is this a special COVID business opportunity for them? I would think McDonald's or Cumberland Farm, like I don't, is there any issue with the, Andy, do you have any thoughts, or Lee? No.
There's really no issue. It's a standard hearing based on the general law that just requires that if there's, I guess, a public necessity or any, or council doesn't feel that there is, that it can be denied, but it's a normal process that we go through every year, because I think it basically says maybe even in our code that the businesses can't be open for a certain amount of time, and this state law would supersede that and allow them to be open for the 24 hours, unless Mr. Tights has anything to add to that.
No, this is Andy Tights. No, I mean, basically, they would not otherwise be allowed to operate between midnight and 4 a.m. And this is the practice for any business, whether it be the gas station here with the market next to it, or anybody who's selling food with a victualling license, such as Insomnia Cookies. They need this kind of license as well.
Need those. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Schwager, you're muted.
I'm sorry. So we had a motion. Did we have a second, Carol?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So we have a
Zarella.
motion. So I'll ask for public comment. Does anyone have a comment on the application for extended hours from any of these vendors? PC Foods, Cumberland Farms, Seasons Corner Market, McDonald's. I see no questions from the public, so I'll call the roll. Councilor Corenthal. Councilor Donegan.
Aye.
Councilor Renu Engelhardt.
Aye.
Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Mark Schwager votes aye. The motion carries 5-0. And so extended hours are granted. This brings us to item 6B. This is an application for a new Class BB alcoholic beverage license with vittling, entertainment, outdoor sidewalk service, and extended hours on New Year's Eve for Grandpa doing business as Union and Main, located at 55 Main Street. And this is an application for a new full-service restaurant where Red Stripe used to be. And there's no zoning on file that exists for the location, so it's considered grandfathered, legal non-conforming. In 2019, Red Stripe was approved for a seating capacity of 181 as a baseline with 14 shared parking spaces. The new applicant is looking to expand the service area and the parking via a lease at Crestar prior to its grand opening. That will require that they appear before the zoning board. So I guess we will grant them, our clerk will comment on this, but I think we'll grant them what Red Stripe was grandfathered into. And if they do go before the zoning board and their expansion is approved, they'll have to come back before the council again to receive approval for that expansion. New applications may be granted but not issued for a period of 1 year per the state DBR commercial licensing and liquor regulations. Ms. Carney, do you have anything to add to that related to this application?
Thank you very much, President Schwager. Just in addition to that, the abutters notices were mailed out on December 1st. The list was attached to the packet. The public hearing was advertised twice in the Pendulum on December 3rd and December 10th. You talked about the lack of the zoning file. You talked about the last approval for seating was 181 seats, which was the baseline, and that was for 165 inside and 16 outside. You noted the parking of the 14 on-site shared spaces on the north side of the building. The corporation itself has 6 partners. Between them, they also own the Back 40 in North Kingstown and the Black Oak Restaurant in Coventry. The entertainment license that they're looking for will vary. The type of entertainment will vary. They're looking for Monday through Sunday, 12 p.m. to close. The majority would be acoustic, and on occasion, a few musicians with low-level amplification inside only, no dancing. They did apply for the extended hour on New Year's Eve, which really wouldn't apply in this instance because they're not going to be open until next summer, and this particular license would expire before the next New Year's Eve. As you noted, they're looking to expand the outdoor service prior to opening in the summer of 2021 from 16 to 75, using the parking area on the side for a patio. They also are looking for additional parking at Crest Star lot, as you noted, and they're negotiating that lease for access during their business hours. The applicant has been speaking with Ernie Marinero and is fully aware that they will need to seek the zoning relief and or a variance in order to be permitted the expansion of service. They also have been speaking with Steve Hughes, the fire marshal, regarding the outdated fire alarm system. Applicant is currently negotiating with the landlord, but the lease is contingent upon a license being granted and a building permit being issued. Per Rhode Island DBR license regulations, licenses may be granted, not issued, for a period of 1 year, subject to full compliance and with conditions and criteria necessary to said issuance. So at this point, I would recommend we hear public comment and answer any council's questions. If you do choose to approve it on a granted not issued basis for the 1 year, should be based on the existing seating capacity of 181 with the parking requirement of 14 on-site shared spaces. And then the applicant would be required to go before the ZBR and come back before council to receive an approval for an expansion of the service area, which does not require an official public hearing as far as I am concerned. And I will note that the applicant is on the line, Justin Dalton. What do you say that right? Amin, Justin Dalton, Amin.
Yep. Hello, everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Amin. I think at this time we will open it to public comment, and then we'll ask for council comments, and we can get a motion. I see a hand raised for, it looks like AM De Silva. Can we promote this participant? Please introduce yourself. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Anne Marie and Manny De Silva. We own 461 Main Street, which
I'm sorry, pardon me, sir. Would you raise your right hand, please? I want to swear you in.
sure.
Do you solemnly, assuming your hand is raised, do you solemnly swear the testimony about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you so much. You may continue.
So we own 461 Main Street, which is the building right next door and encircles the restaurant that you're talking about. My only concern is the previous experience that we've had with Red Stripe, that they and I know that this is a new application, and they always say that they're going to do the right thing and all, but what I can tell you is what happened. That Red Stripe did use the parking lot at Crest Star in order to get their license. And they also had a valet service. But what I can tell you is that they use my property as the parking lot. And so our project is under construction right now. So that those parking spaces will no longer be available. So that may have an impact on the new restaurant because they will have to use the some other parking. And not too long ago, there was also another application from the restaurant across the street, which was it Union? I don't know the name of that.
The corner.
There's another restaurant right across, not on Main Street, but on the side street.
Patio?
Yeah, the patio that was also looking to increase their services. So they're really side to side, and they both want to increase their outside patio, and they both want to take out the parking lot that they both have. And I think that that is a concern. Where are all those people going to park? So if they use the Crestar, which is not convenient, by the way, because I would think that most people, unless they have valet, and they would have to valet everybody, that's going to, I think that the council should really look for more information before you start granting increasing in services.
You're muted, Mark. Mark,
Sorry,
you're-
I'm getting a little tired, I guess. I was going to say, Mr. Dalton, I mean, do you have any comments related to the parking?
Yeah, so,
Mr. Dalton, could you raise your right hand, please? Assuming you have your hand raised, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Yeah, parking is definitely something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. Having the back 40 restaurant, we had some major parking issues there, and we eventually expanded our parking footprint. With this deal, the 51 Liberty space, it needs to be a part of anything that we do. We need to have those spaces available to us. I want to say it's about 36 to 40 spaces. I also talked to Mr. Marinaro from zoning, and I had the landlord's approval to re-stripe that lot and potentially add a few extra spots because it is a huge lot that I don't think is worked. Maybe I think it could be done a little bit better. But with that being said, I mean, we're, you know, this will be our fourth restaurant. Making sure our neighbors are taken care of and happy is very important to us. We don't intend to come in here and do anything that's gonna upset anybody. We try to be kind of a beacon of goodwill in the neighborhood. But I do understand that parking is a major concern. It's a major concern for us, and we intend to get as many spots as we possibly can. And probably also do some sort of valet when and if that is allowed. I believe right now it's shut down due to COVID, but that would be our intention.
This application is, if I'm correct, is just for the victualling, the extended hours. This is not in regards to the actual extended into the parking lot.
Correct.
That will be a variance in front of the zoning board altogether.
That's correct.
So they are going to be held to the original standard, whatever Red Stripe had.
Yes.
Keeping in mind what Mr. Silva actually said.
Yep. So at this point, we're basically giving them a commitment that they are going to be granted the license, but it's going to be based on Steve Hughes and Ernie going in there and making sure that everything is squared away.
Mhm.
And if they don't get zoning approval, then they'll have to deal with the 181 and the 14 spaces on the side, and that's it until they can find another plan.
I'd say to Mr. Silva, taking into consideration the issues that you've had in the past and someone who sat on the zoning board, and know that this is a huge problem on Main Street, and knowing that you are doing construction on that building, which I was aware, I would encourage you to actually either segregate your parking off and use cameras to actually watch the parking lot to see who is using your parking and report it accordingly to the town, either town zoning officer or to bring it to the town manager's attention. It is, I understand, it is a problem that some areas are, they do lease parking lots, but then they use whatever parking is available. I know that's a bigger issue. And I'm certainly sympathetic to that, but since this application is only for their extended service, it's not for their increasing into the parking lot. At that point, I'm not sure what we can do to remedy this factor for you now.
I'm not asking to remedy anything. I'm just voicing concern about the parking. Some of the parking that exists there now is also going to be taken by part of the new construction. There's going to be 6 new townhouses there, really abutting this restaurant. So is also going to be an issue that you're going to have to deal with based on some of your experiences, near closer to the water with some of these restaurants that say one thing and then start doing another. So I'm just voicing I understand what this application is about. I'm just voicing my concern because we want to be good neighbors, but at the same time, we have to go through a very rigorous process in order to get this construction approved. And I would hope that other applicants have to go through the same.
Thank you.
I would ask our solicitor and clerk, as far as the zoning board's oversight of the parking, that some of the issues that Mr. De Silva has raised, how much oversight does the zoning board have as far as what the applicant can do with expanded parking or using other lots?
This is Andy Tights. There's two things. First of all, at the moment, during the COVID emergency, the councils extended the emergency powers so that the town manager can allow the use of current parking areas or even street right-of-ways were available and so forth for outside service during the emergency. That's only good till, I believe, May 31st. The next thing, as far as a permanent basis, yes, the zoning board would have that, and this would definitely be the forum. The neighbors will get notice of it in the mail, and it will be the forum for them to come, and if they, to present their evidence to the board at that point, that this is a problem or will continue and will be worse at a problem, and it will be up to the discretion of the zoning board whether to grant it or not, or to grant it in part. And the people, the neighbors within 200 feet also will have that ability to appeal that to the Superior Court if they don't like that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Donegan.
So Lee, I'm not really sure as I conceive of Red Stripe, the building, I think of it as the frontage on the street, the little bitty side, the angled parking spots on the side street.
Mhm.
Where is the current outdoor service?
Right in the front of the building.
You mean right in the sidewalk?
Yes.
Okay. And right, so, okay.
That was there before COVID too, I think. They
Right.
Yeah, Red Stripe has about 16 outside.
They've always had
The drawings are in the packet, but yeah, it's I think it's got a kind of a funny angle on it. But yeah, it's only on the front now. They don't have nobody was having any seating in that side parking lot.
Okay, and was that was all approved, not as a COVID outside seating, but just a regular part of their, permit?
That's
Okay.
right.
All right, so I guess I'll just throw out there for the applicant that when the patio was operating under a prior owner, that they had outdoor, we'll call it activities, that didn't necessarily jibe with their permit. And there was a pretty large pushback against the applicant for the patio and their plans. And it was a pretty strong, it was a commitment from the owner at the time that there would be no outside seating there to address the concerns of the neighbors, the noise associated with that. And later on now, of course, in the COVID crisis, that's relaxed, but that was an issue that I think you're going to have to probably address at zoning. And even if zoning grants you relief and you come back to us for more outside there, that's going to be something, even if you have parking, that we're going to be sensitive to, or at least I am, as that was a very hotly contested issue on a much, much smaller outside impact, which is the patio parking lot across the street. So I don't know if you're aware of that history, but I just thought I'd flag it for you in case you were not.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We're pretty local, so we're definitely aware of the parking issues in East Greenwich.
Okay, good.
And we are we fully intend to go through all the required steps. And really the reason for us even seeking to do this is because of COVID and the huge push to get everybody outside. I mean,
Okay,
just experiencing it in North Kingstown with the emergency use of our parking lot, and people feel more comfortable outside, so it's kind of a way for us to offer,
Yep.
make people feel a little more secure, and that's our intention.
sure, perfectly understandable. If the world went back to normal 2 years from now, are you thinking you move back inside?
If we're able to do it, it's going to be done really tastefully. It's going to look really good, and our goal would be to have it long term, a long permanent fixture if we're
Yep.
able to get it approved.
All right,
But that by no means is a deal breaker for us. We fully intend to. I mean, we have a really beautiful vision for that space. It's going to require a pretty much full demo and reworking of the space. Kind of liven it up, brighten it up, make it kind of clean, and we really like what the designers put together for us so far. Moving the bar into that front room and just making a nice kind of neighborhood spot is our goal.
sure. Okay, I would just encourage you, if you have a goal of something beyond COVID outside, more long-term, that I would predict that you're going to be met with substantial resistance from the neighbors. And you might, I don't know if you've already done an outreach, but you probably want to do that before you hit the zoning board on that, because you're certainly going to have a lot of activity on it. And I think that's, you would be proposing something more significant than, say, the patio. I know that's not in front of us now, and the zoning board will hear that, but be mindful of the fact that even if the zoning board grants it, when you come to our license, we have the ability to hear all that same evidence on impacts to the neighbors. The zoning is a predicate, not the full authorization, because we have a license obligation as well.
Yeah,
So I encourage you to do that outreach. It'll make it easier for all of us and you.
yeah, I certainly will reach out and just to introduce ourselves and let people know our plans. It also isn't calling for that whole parking lot. I think the plan, we would lose 3 of the spots. It's not a massive outdoor thing we're attempting to get done. I want to say it's maybe 50 seats total on the side.
Mhm.
But point taken, I definitely will reach out. We've gone through this in North Kingstown before, so.
Parking spots?
What's that?
Yeah, I was just saying that because you're walking into a relatively charged situation
Mhm.
in that one little side street. So I just wanted you to, if you're not aware of it, I just wanted to flag it for you. If you are, then you know what you're taking on. And
It is what
that's
it is.
not really in front of us tonight, but I thought it would be helpful to pass it along.
No, for sure. I appreciate that. I'll definitely do my due diligence and community outreach for sure.
Do we have any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve this application for the new Class BV alcoholic beverage license with vittling, entertainment, outdoor sidewalk service, and extended hours on New Year's Eve for Union and Main, located at 455 Main Street.
So move.
Second,
Motion from Mike Zarella, seconded by Michael Donegan. We'll take the roll. Mr. Donegan?
Aye.
Mr. Zarella?
Aye.
Counselor Engelhardt? Counselor Cornthal? Mark Schwager votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. Mr. Dalton Amin, we wish you well, and I'm excited about this vision you have for the corner. And Mr. De Silva, thank you for participating in our meeting tonight, and you probably can follow up some of your concerns at the zoning board when that hearing occurs. So we'll now move to item 7, which is public comment. This is another opportunity for the public to weigh in on items that were not on the agenda or any other items that they care to comment on. I see no attendees with their hands raised. So we will go on to council announcements and comments. Would any of the councilors like to amend the agenda to add a council comment? I don't see any hands waving. So this will bring us to item 9, which is adjournment. Do I have a
Motion to
motion?
adjourn? Oh, sorry.
Mr.
jumped the
Zarella
gun.
makes a motion. Mr. Donegan, as is his habit, will follow. All those in favor, sorry, our clerk has her hand up.
Just a quick note to add that this is officially our last meeting of the year. So we're going to be canceling, I believe was a discussion to cancel the last meeting on December 28th.
Unless you don't want us to.
I think we should meet the whole week.
Every day.
Yes, thank you for bringing that to our attention. I don't think we have to take action on that. Do we, Mr. Tights? I think it's.
No,
General-
that's administrative. You don't have to do it, just has to post it.
It's a
At the
ministerial
Secretary of
task.
State's website that it's canceled.
All right. And Mark, was this number 83?
This is 84.
84. Our 84th meeting.
We did pretty well. So our
And
last.
shortest.
See, before we adjourn, to wish the council, the staff, and the public happy holidays, happy new year.
Yes.
We've gotten a lot done again. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Signify by raising your hand. Aye, motion carries 5-0. Thanks again, everybody.
All right.
for your time
Thank
and
you all. Stay safe
Take
and
care.
sane,
Happy
everybody.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
Everybody should buy the
Stay
blue
well.
glasses.
All right. Bye.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.